All right. Hello and welcome back. This is Colin Keeley here.
And I'm Brent Sanders.
And we are two guys buying and building wonderful internet companies.
Indeed. And we've had a lot of tech stuff happening this last week, the last 2 weeks. And as you can probably hear, I've caught whatever virus that's been going around, at least northern United States, which is like this 2-week cold, which I feel fine. I still sound pretty bad, but over that 2-week period, we wrapped up like the most of our quarterly goals for Scout, which is the big ones, moving to Stripe for subscriptions and then moving to Stripe for payments for our customers. And we just shipped that yesterday, which involved a lot of going through old code that hasn't been touched in like years that we probably should be more careful with deploying, but we dug into it. And I think we have a great deal of confidence despite not having any tests or anything manual testing. But yeah, we got it out and done. And I'm excited to see the change in how customer behavior goes, signups go. I think it's going to be a huge improvement from Braintree, which was just awful. Like, I don't know if you did any like live experimentation with Braintree, but like the amount of declines that they have, it's like crazy. And I don't know if it's a fraud thing, but I was going on our customer accounts like that are very reputable. They process tens of thousands from regularly, and just adding a new card, it's like declined. And it's a good card. I know it's legit. And I go into Braintree. I mean, I don't have access to see everything, but you do it on Stripe and it works. And I don't know, it's just a different level.
Yeah. So just to put it in perspective, if you onboard and you're like, you have to sign up for us, then you have to sign up for Braintree. And the previous owner had a blast out from Intercom, just an automated email, basically apologizing for Braintree and saying,
Right.
Whatever issue you're running into, because you're 100% going to run into this, it's an issue on their side, and this is how you fix it. And like, this is the workaround. And so that is the sign up flow for Scout, or at least it has been for the last 5 years or whatever. So it felt really good to turn that off because it's been sent out like, I don't know, 1,000 times or something to every single person that signed it up for years.
Yeah. So despite that, I mean, the fun part about this was we got to touch every single part of the platform. So there's mobile apps for the pet parents, mobile apps for the dog walkers, the web app for the business, the web app for the pet parents. Like everything now has the same code and same Stripe updates. And then we got into they actually have separate billing microservices that this is where code hadn't been touched in quite a while. But it's fun when it's like the most rewarding part of software engineering is sometimes like you're given no documentation. We do diligence. We make sure things work and that they're sanely put together, but then you get to change it and some sort of confidence around it happens. It takes longer than we expected. And at the same time, we're supporting live users, which is kind of the challenge. I think that's been one of the challenges in that project versus any acquisition. I mean, it's just our third. That one's been like, since day one, support's been like, there's always activity. There's questions, requests, changes. It's super active, which is a testament to the customer base, but also the interest there is in that product.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with like business management software for X is like this literally runs their business and they touch it 100 times a day.
Yeah.
So yeah, customer support's been wild. I think that is also the potential of like, we're charging these people like $30 a month to run their whole business.
Yeah.
And contact us every day. So there's a lot of space there to do other things. But this is an interesting one. I mean, you always think it's just like, all right, we bought something, ad sales and marketing, off to the races. And there's always a big tech lift. This one, I guess, was also, we bought it from a very technical founder. Is that a little different, I guess, from your perspective at all?
Yeah, I think the transition from this founder, I mean, so there was two things here that were interesting. One, it made me appreciate like how much work that he put into this. And I actually even asked him like exactly how long did it take? Because there's so many code bases. There's so much code in those code bases. They work, right? Like there's very like the quality of the code's very good. It's just not tested. So certain best practices aren't, and you won't find many startups that have like great test coverage, although we've acquired companies that have great test coverage sometimes. So it's just kind of luck of but yeah, he wrote everything himself. I mean, I think he hired some help here and there, but like I was blown away. And thinking about like other ventures that we started from the beginning of like, I always limited, like, I'm not going to do this until we get a certain amount of business growth. And I think he just built all this stuff and it was there. And so I think the transition was good, but the way that he showed the code was beneficial. And I think that was one of the things in diligence that we saw is like, he broke apart the billing service. He broke apart the payment service. Some of these things were broken into smaller pieces. So yes, we got them in sort of not shambles, but in like, this is just how it is. And there's no tests and we can't run it locally and good luck trying to get it kind of tested and working. But it's always, you can always look to production and be like, okay, what's going on there? And how do we kind of mirror that? But the challenge is you have to be technical yourself. And I think there's also a benefit that I'm lucky to be the age I am, because a lot of these things were built, and I've mentioned this before, a lot of these things were built during like my professional years. So it's like, I'm aware of the issues and the versions of things. And so I think it's one thing we've been able to navigate quite well. We've bought very technical businesses. I mean, they're all software companies, but some are a little bit more boxed up and tidy than others. And that's kind of the fun part of this, is like digging into the puzzle and getting it put back together. So I don't know. I don't see that as been like a major challenge for us. I think that's one thing we've been kind of lucky with. Is the other thing is I've tried to always keep an open line of communication with the seller or the tech founder. So with Scout, like we got 90 days, we negotiated, but I even said to him like, hey, let's keep a consulting agreement open. So if I have questions, and man, he shared a file with me that like would have meant the difference between rewriting this whole service or using what he already had. And thankfully he's like, oh yeah, I meant to give you this. And it's like, yeah, that's the key we were missing. So that was good to have. And I think keeping a good relationship open is vital. And part of that is incentivization through deal design, right? Like I think seller note is a big part of this. It's like, hey, we're all on the same team and we don't do earnouts typically. So, but I can see that keeping that person around, because you never know whether it's just a password or a file or something that you need to unlock past work.
So I'd like the spectrum of tech debt, right? There's always some form of tech debt. I'd say extreme of it. Like what would be too much that you wouldn't take on?
That's a good question, because it's like, I feel like we take on a lot. I think it's a matter of like, we even have situations where like we're afraid, or not afraid, but like we wouldn't want to touch certain servers, like a database server, because it's like the only one running at the time of acquisition. There's situations like that. I think that's the scenario where it's like, do we feel comfortable like restarting something, and do we think it would not come back up? That's usually the line I would toe. It's like, okay, this isn't stable enough to restart it, or like can't come back online. That being said, I mean, we're in a situation where we've acquired something, and then there are ways to, like, for example, like a database, you can put things sort of in front of it. You can add a replica. Like we've learned these techniques to take like either outdated or fragile or brittle systems and add redundancy to them, add backups to them, add these things that give us, okay, there's mitigating factors that make it feasible. But like a hard and fast no, I'd say it probably would just be something that's like still suffering from like a known security issue, right? Like what was the most recent Java related one? I forget the name of it, but as everyone was patching Java. So making sure those things aren't there. But that's the basics of our DD.
Yeah. Because I'm always looking at Constellation, and I listened to an interview of another one this week, and like they'll pick up these companies who are just super cheap. And it seems like as long as they're throwing off cash and they're like putzing along, they'll take on basically the worst of the worst, as long as they're confident they could keep it running. And they'll just shut down all innovation and run it for cash flow. But I'm not that technical. I don't know what the extreme of that is. And when you just like, this is impossible.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one thing to say, hey, if you're just going to run it for cash flow, like with all of our acquisitions, we're taking a pretty heavy hand. Like we're coming in and we're taking out Braintree and swapping. That's a pretty big, if you think about what in the domains of what Scout does, billing is a pretty huge domain. So to rework that with a different payment service, and all the responses, everything works differently than Braintree. I mean, roughly you're sending something to be approved or not approved, but it's a pretty big change. Same thing that we've done with Automatic and with Blinkcell. Like we've gotten very involved in that. So it's like, yes, could you pour concrete over it and say, hey, we're never going to change it. We're just going to cash flow this. And then if it's really successful down the line, maybe we'll rewrite it. But I don't think we look at things that are like, we always want to be able to work with it, because I think we see it's a slow growth, like a slow process to do all this. But like, I think we always see, hey, there's going to be some improvement. But I could see like GovTech software where it's like, or there are certain domains where you just don't want to touch it, keep it running. And that actually, there's a lot of like advancements in that world of containerization and things that you can do to cut costs. Like, that's a really interesting thing. I don't know if you saw this recent update from the 37 Signals folks, or David Hanmeyer Hansen was a very like triggering figure in the Twitterverse, but they've been moving all of their infrastructure off the cloud, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of like doing all this containerization and doing it on your own infrastructure, I think that's really interesting. I think that's where we're going to end up spending a lot more time, is like, yes, things are on clouds right now, moving them onto our own infrastructure, on our own data center. The costs at scale are, the cost savings are huge. I mean, they're massive. I mean, you think about it, one of the biggest things we pay for with Automatic, which we have a good way of getting around it, which is we allow you to run backups on your own infrastructure, is traffic. And you don't really have to pay for traffic as much as with cloud hosted resources. It's very expensive to pass data around in someone else's infrastructure. So all those things I think are directions that you can go with not having to touch the code, and you just kind of containerize this old code and you can optimize it in other ways to make it more attractive, more appealing, to squeeze that growth out of it.
Yeah. I think he was saying they're going to save over $1 million a year by moving off the cloud. And it's like basically the most impactful thing they could do. I mean, they're not going to cut 10 people or whatever. And this is kind of an easy thing. So he's all about it. He's been posting about it nonstop for like 6 months, like all he talks about now.
I wouldn't be so like boastful. I mean, that's his thing. Like, I would be super nervous around telling everybody about that, because it's like the redundancy. I guess he's a super confident guy, and I'm sure he's a smart dude, knows what he's doing. But yeah, I mean, we have AWS outages that would be avoided. I mean, I think it will be shifting back in that direction. And I'm excited about that, because that's kind of the world I came from, co-location, all that stuff of having a server and having a team down at the data center. And that seems like a good advancement. I'd like to see that more companies do that. Sorry.
Other questions. Shout out to Jeremy Jackson, one of our listeners, for sending over some questions, and they're almost all tech related. So this is the Grilling Brent episode.
Love it.
His other question was along the lines of nearshore, onshore. How are you thinking about scaling up the tech team?
Yeah,
Offshore.
I think it depends on resources in my mind. Like, I think there's always, as I've gotten glimpses in some firms, like they are all offshore or all below a certain dollar amount. So it's like, you could be onshore, you could be nearshore. You're just going to get paid a certain point below some tier. The way that I'm thinking about it right now is, I think I mentioned this in prior episode, I've hired an apprentice. So paying a little bit more for full-time help that can really allow me to leverage my time a little bit better, leverage them, and investing in that person to scale up. I mean, I think that's one thing that I'm seeing like a lot of value out of, and that's kind of always been happening, as we've talked about in past episodes. But then there's like, what do you do when you have a ton of work or you want to do a rewrite of an entire application? I think that there are some advantages for like, hey, you're just going to need 3 to 4 people to do something, or 2 to 3 people to do something, and it's not going to require a lot of back and forth. So those are, in my mind, those are like the great spots for offshore talent, is give them something that can be sort of modular, right? Give them entire pieces. And that's where we've seen success, where it's like, hey, we want to upgrade from this version to that version. And it's pretty straightforward, and it doesn't require a lot of back and forth, and it has test coverage. So it's like, you just need someone smart to do it, and it doesn't need to be like a lot of meeting around it, and it can be done asynchronously. I think the stuff that kills me is hey, we have to have a conversation almost every other day about a tricky issue or a product feature that's like maybe partially baked or is going through iteration. That it's just too hard. It's too hard on me to show up at like 8, 9 in the morning and then be like, hey, you get 1 or 2 hours or 3 hours at most to accomplish this in order to unblock the next day. And otherwise you lose multiple days. I just think from a product management perspective, it makes my life miserable.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm seeing a lot more movement.
I mean, the time zone changes or the time zone's difference is just tough. I want to start hiring some folks in like South America. If we ever want to visit them, it's like a 5-hour flight instead of like 20 hours to go across the world in our time zone. But so I've seen people have success there. A funny one recently is I've been looking for a good Webflow developer as I've like reached the limits of my ability to do some stuff on there. It's not all no code. It eventually turns to code and then becomes a problem. But I found a really good one but it's Ukraine, right? So it's like he runs into issues, then he kind of disappears for like 2 days at a time. So he does really good work. It's kind of cool, like to support folks over there. But like he hadn't gone to his office in I think a year until somewhat recently. Because apparently if you walk the streets, I think he's in Kiev or like one of the big cities, they would just take like able-bodied men of like army age and like draft them into the army. Yeah. So he wouldn't leave his home because he couldn't risk it. He didn't want to leave like his kids. So, but yeah, he's doing great work over there, just in the midst of a war.
Yeah, man, that's a trip. It's not great. I mean, we have a family that moved here local. Actually, it's a relative, good friend of mine's cousin. She has family in Ukraine who's been distant, but they moved here. They were able to, the wife and the son were able to move. And then the father was able to move. And I think he's still working out his visa issues, but he was able to leave because of a medical issue or something. So they are very happy to be here. Like literally, I think the day after they left, their apartment building got bombed. And they're like, there's no, it was in the middle of, this was like 2 months ago. I think it was middle of January. And it's like no windows. And the building was fine. It was like next door got attacked with a missile, but there's no glass. Imagine like living through 10 below and there's no windows. It's like, fuck. So very grateful for our safety. And yeah. Anyways, he's a super cool guy. And his son has become friends with my son. He's working up his English. So yeah, shout out to Sasha. Yeah, it's a trip.
Anything else you wanted to cover? I don't really have a bunch else.
Yeah, no, that's about it. I mean, I think I've been super heads down. I think I'm really excited. This has been a really busy last 3 months of like hands-on, low leverage work on both Automatic and Scout. And we're finally starting to get some good talent in and get people in place. And I'm excited to kind of pick my head up a little bit more and start working on some more strategic things again.
Yeah. I mean, just like revenue wise and business wise, things have gone about as well as possible. I mean, we haven't talked for a few weeks on this podcast, but like things have been up. Everything's done well. Like a lot of stuff we've been working on, finished some fundraising, got some money in the door. I've been doing taxes, which has been just horrible. Bookkeeping taxes and like closing a round of funding. It's just like I'm in paperwork hell. I had to walk. So I don't have a printer, right? So I had to go to a coffee shop and print stuff. And then I had to go to a notary at Chase because Chase is never used, I guess you could use. So I had to do that. And then I had to scan because you need a wet signature, of course, for the SEC for some reason. But yeah, been insulating you from all that mess, but getting through it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I just like let it pile up on my desk until it's as late as humanly possible. So you don't want me doing that stuff. You'd rather have I could push code a lot faster.
Yeah, I hate it.
But yeah, it's been good. Actually, we could talk about some updates. I don't want to get in too far of detail, but like I think one really validating thing or cool thing that felt like Moneyball a little bit, like you start losing with, we've been working on this stuff for Automatic, like the onboarding flow. And we released some features that it was all a theory. And we were kind of like working for months on this theory of like, it's going to be easier. It's going to be easier. We've got to fix the funnel. And sure enough, we released the features and the funnel was fixed. It was like super validating and rewarding to see the numbers like start to just go way up based on that. I mean, I don't want to talk into specifics, but it was like all based on, and it's funny, this happened a lot in venture deals where like we talked about, okay, we need to work on this, work on that. And you saw some changes, but this was like a very drastic change and it felt like an outsized win because of all the work that went into it. So that's kind of the first time that's ever really happened where it's like been a resounding success from like a feature. Usually it's like, yeah, there's a feature, but there's also sales and marketing pushing it, which we're doing, but it definitely feels like a marked improvement. And that feels awesome.
Yeah. A J curve is always like a theoretical thing where you're like investing. There's a natural drop. And then in theory, it's going to rocket up at some point. But that's exactly what the chart looks like. It's like down, shoot up. Yeah. Just at one like inflection point. So that's been super cool to see. I know competitors listen, so we won't give any like a future product advice or product thoughts there. Yeah, that's one.
I got one other thing we should talk about. I forgot to mention it, and we didn't talk about this. We didn't really prep for this, but I don't know if you saw I think it was the CEO of Chart Mogul talking about Baremetrics posting they're having their books open. Did you see this tweet?
No.
It was super interesting. I'll share it with you, but to paraphrase it, it was kind of a savage thing. So I'm in my the Twitter tea, but he basically was saying one of the benefits from working in open or opening your books up to everybody like Josh did and from Baremetrics is you get some notoriety and maybe you'll get some new people to sign up. But he was saying one of the biggest disadvantages is your competitors see exactly what's going on. And they were basically looking at their numbers being like, okay, what we're doing is working. We're seeing, I won't get into the exact trends, but they were taking a ton of intelligence from that and knowing that they were able to double down on what was working. And they could tell what wasn't working for them was working for Chart Mogul. So it was very interesting. And it kind of was a little bit, I'm wondering why would you even say that? Cause what's the upside in kind of shitting on that? But if you look at Chart Mogul started after them, their first sale was later, and Baremetrics, and they just saw this number probably related to, they had that big price increase where did they double their prices?
Yeah, they doubled their prices and it looked great initially. And then it's basically declined since then. I haven't checked. I think it's probably still declining. And that seemed like it's going to be hard to overcome. But that whole space is kind of crazy. I mean, Baremetrics sold for 3 or 4 million, and Profitwell, a competitor, ended up selling for 300 million or something. It's a 100x difference.
Wow. Yeah. And then Stripe is kind of eating in that space, which is scary to play. But anyways, it was an interesting tweet where this guy was like, maybe you shouldn't be sharing these, that level of detail because your competitors are basically feasting on that data.
I think it's so dumb. So Profitwell, just to correct myself, sold for 200 million. But building in public and saying your revenue, especially once you get beyond 10, 20,000 a month, and it's clearly a success, you're just inviting 1 million competitors because there's so many people out there that are good at building and just have no idea what to build. As soon as you say hey, build this, it's working. You just there's a lot of sharks kind of hiding in the water. And so I get building in public until it starts to work. And then you should shut up. Just don't talk about it anymore and just do your thing and continue to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. He was saying, I'll share the tweet with you. I bookmarked it, but it was being able to see the numbers allowed us to see the results of certain pricing changes and their experiments and avoid essentially mistakes. And there's just kind of a ruthless, I guess they're showing their MRR. I guess now they are showing historical, this is back in 2020. So it's not terribly wild, but they're showing their MRR just vastly exceeded. I mean, they were up to, looks nearly 400,000 in 2020.
Yeah. It's an interesting space because Profitwell is free. Baremetrics is, I think, nicer, but super expensive. So I'm not really sure why anyone would use Baremetrics really. Profitwell makes money when they have retained their different features. So if people are churning because their customer credit card expired, they'll bring some back and take a percentage. I think that's a better business model.
That's great. I mean, I would pay for that all day as we do. I think, you know, we use it and it's well worth it. We're trying to chase people down. It's hey, we'll split this with you happily.
Yeah. It's amazing how often those cards expire. And I think they get something only 20% come back. And maybe with Profitwell, it's 80%. So it's it's a pretty big difference.
Cool. Yeah.
But yeah,
I don't know. That's pretty much all I got. It's Friday. I think we're going to start moving this to more of a weekday, middle of the week to improve we've been kind of sparse on our updates. So here's to some more regular releases of new episodes.
Yeah. Friday recording is just dangerous. It's easy to punt and then you're punting for a whole week instead of oh, I'll just do it tomorrow. So yeah, stay tuned for more consistent episodes going forward.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for listening.
All right. See you, everyone.